So we're gonna get into Game of Thrones now. Now, little backstory here.
Little secret.
I am your textbook Kool-Aid drinking Game of Thrones fan. It
Yes.
fits so many characteristics that I like about Star Wars. Like, it's serious instead of humorous, as opposed like the Marvel's. And I enjoy Marvel. Don't get me wrong, but Marvel's like lack of seriousness throughout kind of undercuts a lot of the
Right.
power behind the plot. You know what I
Right.
mean? And Game of Thrones reminds me of Star Wars, where like there's little touches of humor here and there, but it's a serious idea. There's a deep lore behind it.
Right.
There's-
Massive effort goes into the plot, right?
Exactly. There's a really interesting mix of like supernatural power and normal human like mortality. And there's and the human mortality is far more expansive than the supernatural power. So the
Right.
supernatural power almost has like a little bit of like a myth vibe
Right.
going
It's
on.
limited. You can't just like a wizard can't just like wave their hand and take out an entire castle, right?
Exactly.
Like and sometimes with some of like the Marvel stuff, when you just see how like ridiculous the scale is, it's just like, okay, like where does it stop? Where are the rules for this? You know what I mean?
Exactly, and that's the thing. Like Han Solo will be like, oh, Jedi, like I don't believe in the Jedi, right?
Right.
And then like you'll have people in Westeros that are like, okay, yeah, the mages, they're gonna stop us, you know, like that kind of thing. So Luke, I am your textbook Kool-Aid drinking Game of Thrones fan. I've seen the entire Game of Thrones series 2 times all the way through. And I've done a good amount of cursory research. Definitely not as much as I know with Star Wars, but I know a good amount. Luke never got into it the first time. And in his defense, he's a very busy man. And one of the things I appreciate about you, and this is a difference between Carly and I and you and Elena, is you are extremely active in your downtime. And I mean that sincerely as a compliment. Like, you will do woodworking projects, and you'll do stuff around the house, and you'll get caught up. And obviously your job currently has a ton of paperwork that's associated with it.
Just
and you're
insane. Yeah.
You don't spend a lot of time in front of the television.
No.
I spend a good chunk of my life in front of the television because of watching basketball. And then what Carly works a traditional 9 to 5, but puts in more than 40 hours a week. And so she comes home every night, and I have a flexible job, so I try to get stuff done during the day. And when she comes home, like, we sit down and we watch TV.
Yeah, just hang out.
Yeah, so
That's
we're
normal,
on
right?
the TV series and things like that. I have been pressuring Luke because I know that this is something that you will enjoy. Like,
Yeah.
when you get to the point where you're attached to it, I believe you will enjoy it.
No, I'm sure I will, because one of the biggest things that you and I talk about, and one of the things that I'm thankful for Star Wars is they're really they spend a lot of time working on the plot,
Yes.
which is what really bothered us about the sequels, right?
Exactly.
Because we felt like they didn't. But I know that Game of Thrones is super plot. Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones.
It's kind of a joke for us, like Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones is super plot heavy, and I'm excited for that. And also, so some first initial takes. So for all of our viewers, I did not watch the original Game of Thrones. I made it into
Really quick though, I noticed on my HBO you're on episode 4. Did you start rewatching it?
No, I don't know who's watching that.
Someone else has my HBO logins. Red alert, people.
I made it like the first couple of episodes, right? And then
You
we
made it
just
through the first season, I actually think. Because you made it to Ned Stark getting his head cut off.
That's right. Okay,
Yes.
so we made it a little into it, but then time wise,
got busy,
it just
yeah.
didn't happen, right? So I'm like the novice Game of Thrones viewer, we'll call me, because I wouldn't even call myself a fan at this point. So Jason's kind of walking me through this.
Yes.
So, but original take on it is obviously the plot's heavy, which I like.
Mm-hmm.
And also the music in it is beautiful.
The production's excellent. HBO nails Game of Thrones.
The scores, they rely on almost like an orchestra type feel, and I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny because I really liked the first episode because I'm a fan of the source material. So like I just felt like it's kind of like the same reason I enjoyed The Force Awakens. Like it's hard not to please me when it's my first time watching Game of Thrones in 5 years or whatever it's been, and same for when we watched The Force Awakens. So time will tell if this ends up actually being a good prequel. I was nervous for you because one of our jokes was like, looking at Elena, we're like, the first episode of Game of Thrones was weird. The original Game of Thrones was weird because it was like incest, and you're like, blah blah blah,
Heavy
and I remember,
incest.
yeah, heavy incest. And I remember just being like, I remember saying like, when I was watching, I was like terrified because I'm like, Luke's gonna hate this because the Targaryen family specifically practices incest as like a tradition. Like
Ooh.
when the Lannisters were, when Cersei and now I'm forgetting his name, but when they were having sex at the beginning of the original Game of Thrones, that was considered taboo, and they wanted to hide that for a while.
Yeah.
But the Targaryens, like, there's a reason why they all have like flowing white hair,
Super blonde hair.
yeah, and there might be. I was unable to confirm this through my research, and maybe some Game of Thrones nerd that's and I say that as a compliment. I don't think nerds are bad, because I'm a nerd. I'm a basketball nerd. I'm a Star Wars.
You and I are
nerd.
nerds.
Yeah, we're nerds. But a Game of Thrones nerd out there might be able to answer this. But I believe the one specific characteristic of the Targaryens is they're fireproof. Because there are moments in the Game of Thrones original show, which I will eventually make you watch, that where Daenerys Targaryen can walk out of burning buildings unscathed and things like that. So I wonder if that's part of it. But their incest is literally like they have kids, and the brother and the sister get married. Like that's just what they do.
That's how they keep a good bloodline.
That's how they keep a good, strong bloodline. Yeah. So I was nervous for your sake that your first episode would once again be plagued by incest.
And I thought it was going to happen too, because in the early on when the uncle shows up,
Daemon and Rhaenyra,
and he's putting the necklace on her, and
that
it was like a little sensual, just a touch.
Dude, Carly and I were literally like, here we go.
This is where Luke's out.
It's like, turn around.
No, there was some times though when Elena and I were watching it, and it was during the jousting scene, and dudes are just getting wrecked, right? And then they just start fighting each other for no reason, and then just out of nowhere, it's just an axe to that guy's face. And Elena and I look at each other and we're like, oh my gosh, like this is not relaxing at all. But for all of our viewers, again, I don't really like a whole lot of violence. And the following night, which was last night, Elena and I literally watched Father of the Bride, which is like a chick flick.
Oh, really?
And we're like,
so
oh my
funny.
gosh, this is so relaxing.
Relaxing. Okay, for the record, when it comes to TV watching, I am 100% on board with the idea of like moods. Like, I'm sometimes not in the mood for an intense show. Like, for instance, I really would like to watch season 3 of Barry, because Barry is one of my favorite shows that I've ever watched. One of the reasons why I've been putting off watching it is that show does have a steady diet of anxiety. Yeah. And so like sometimes I don't feel like dealing with that. Like Carly and I started New Girl again last night because we kind of cycle through like 4 sitcoms, New Girl, Scrubs, How I Met Your Mother, Friends sometimes. Yeah. And we do that because it's like you want to sit down at the couch at the end of the night and watch mindless TV.
Yeah, there's a level of familiarity, right?
Exactly. And it's relaxing.
That's super relaxing.
So so I prefer almost the appointment viewing style of watching shows as they come out, because it's like, okay, Sunday night I'm watching Game of Thrones, but then the other nights
You're geared up for it. I see.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so the first thing, the dynamic that I thought was really interesting. So in the Game of Thrones show, you learn that it starts with Aerys Targaryen, known as the Mad King, getting killed. And he gets killed by Robert Baratheon in a rebellion where he unites a bunch of houses, including the Stark family in the north, and they capture the King's Landing, which is the city where the Targaryens resided, and they actually basically take over and kill all the Targaryens except for Daenerys and her brother Viserys, and they actually disappear across the Narrow Sea to Essos, which is the other continent in the east. And that's where their start of the story goes. And Daenerys is over there for seasons before she actually comes back with the dragons. Okay. Mm-hmm. But the important detail is there's no dragons. So I think that's a perfect place to start, is like the power dynamics of the dragons. So like basically they
have 10, right?
At the height of the power of the Targaryen dynasty, at the start of the show, they had 10 dragons, 10 adult dragons. But what you learn is over the course of the next 100 years, the dragons start to shrink. They don't grow to the same big sizes. And then eventually they just go extinct. And if if I'm not mistaken, it's directly related to them not being used in combat.
Oh,
like
wow.
they need to be conquering shit to stay full grown, right? So they shrink away and they
That's
die.
kind of a problem.
So then you get one, and again, most of the kings, the Targaryen kings, were kind and good kings that the people supported, but you get this Aerys guy who's literally known as the Mad King because he's freaking insane, and then they don't have the dragons anymore. Suddenly it becomes a contest of arms, and the Northmen were able to come up with enough people to
I see.
come together and kick him out. But Daenerys goes across to Essos, and she has dragon eggs. She has 3 dragon eggs.
And he's got an aunt that's really hot
yeah,
that he wants to hook up with or something, right?
Well, yeah, there is definitely some incestuous stuff between the brother and sister as they go across the water. I won't do any more spoilers for you there, but
Okay.
the idea there is the dragons.
Oh, spoil.
The dragons were their power,
Yeah.
and I thought it was really interesting at the end of the episode when Viserys tells Rhaenyra, when he's like, "Hey, you're going to be my heir," he literally says he's like, "We should never have messed with these dragons. They are a power beyond our control. And the only reason we have our power is because the people of Westeros think that we control
them.
the dragons. We don't control the dragons." So I dove into that concept a little bit this morning. And basically, in Essos, the other continent, there was a civilization called Valeria. And they found all the dragons alongside these volcanoes. I have so much hair on me.
Lord, I told you she's shedding so much.
But all the dragons lived on the volcanoes. And basically what ended up happening was the Targaryens got some dragons as well, and they actually fled to Westeros, and they took 3 dragons with them. Then all the volcanoes blew up. And when all the volcanoes blew up, all the dragons died, and
geez.
the entire Valerian civilization died.
Wow.
They called it the Doom of Valeria. And so what happened was all of a sudden there were no dragons except for the Targaryens' dragons.
This is so funny. Not to cut you off, I think the rest of this show should just be you telling me, because I'm enjoying this so much more. I feel like I'm like a little kid that's being put to bed, and I'm like listening to like a night story. Like,
tell me about the Targaryen dynasty.
Instead of just watching like axes go into people's faces.
Well, and again, like I just thought that was interesting. Like the idea, the power dynamics of the dragons. Like, we shouldn't have the dragons, but we do. Everyone thinks we're the only ones that can control them, and so as a result, everyone serves us. But if that gets out, if that secret gets out,
Big problem.
we're screwed. But yeah, like, do the dragons move you at all?
Oh yeah, I think they're super cool. That's one of the things that Elena and I were talking about when we were watching it. It's just like, she's like, every like mythical story, it seems like, has dragons in it, right? So this has dragons in it. She named a bunch of stuff that actually had dragons in it. A good example, Harry Potter, right?
Yep, Harry Potter.
Like
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings. So they're just the prime example of like a mythical, powerful, really interesting creature, right? So yeah, the dragons are tight. I love them.
Yeah, I like the dragons in Game of Thrones too, because they're not invincible.
Yeah.
They are very powerful, and with 10 of them, you can rule a continent. Hell, you can conquer a continent with 3.
Yeah, and they smell.
Yeah, they smell apparently. Well, you saw the giant skull, right?
Yeah.
So that's Balerion the Dread. So Aegon the Conqueror, the first Targaryen king who conquered Westeros, that was his dragon, and it was bigger than all the dragons. But all of the ones since then have been smaller because of the. And that was the other thing with the. And I actually thought about you when I saw this. Do you remember the scene during the jousting contest where Rhaenys, the queen that never was, is talking to Corlys, I believe, which is the master of the military, I believe, and she's basically like. She's like, all these knights they have no idea what war is like. It's been 70 years since we've had a real contact. All they are is dudes with pent up testosterone and
they're just fighting each other for no reason.
Idea what the actual. And it just reminds one of Luke's long-standing theories is like, just in general, our younger generations just have no idea what real trauma is like, because it's like the example you use is like there are countries where it's like you're a dentist one day and then the next day you're holding a rifle because you have to. It's like, guess I can't be a dentist this week. I've got to fight to survive with my family.
Right. It's insane. Yeah.
I thought about you when I saw that, because it's an interesting concept of like what happens with militaristic cultures when they're not at war. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they get pent up for sure.
Exactly. So the just in general, I thought it was funny to the stupidity of nobility lines, and like all of the drawbacks of being in a situation where like, oh, I don't have a male heir, so now I'm stuck between potentially having to make a female, which is not necessarily obviously an issue as a queen, but like, let's say for instance, you did have females that were not like Rhaenyra, who have ambitions to be a leader, but are less ambitious, or you have to go potentially outside of your family. Like that dynamic just seems so like inefficient.
It's super problematic.
Silly. Yeah.
It's very outdated, obviously.
Yeah. Right. It turns out there's a better way to do it.
Yeah.
It's funny to me too, like how in Great Britain, how they keep doing it, but like only in a symbolic way, not in a way that has real power.
Right.
It's such an interesting dynamic.
And it's really, and I kind of, another tangent, but I kind of like that they do it. It's like very like, I don't know, it's kind of traditional and cool. And like it's almost like sacred in a way.
Yeah,
like,
it is
it's really
sacred.
cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I totally see what you're saying, and it's terribly inefficient. And that's kind of one of the things that kind of pissed me off is the king, he's trying so hard to have a boy, right? And he finally gets one, but obviously it dies. And then he's like, "Oh, my daughter, I'm so sorry. You've been here the whole entire time." And then now he's down for her to be in charge.
Yeah.
That was ridiculous. He's a very weak individual, I think.
Yes. Actually, I had that in my notes. So, because the concept you're talking about is really interesting. Like, so literally he gets chosen because of the fear of putting a female on the Iron Throne.
Yeah.
And then it takes his son dying, his wife dying, and his brother deeply insulting him.
And just being a psychopath.
And being an absolute psychopath. And having a room full of men say, you cannot let your brother be king. He's a psychopath.
Yeah.
That he finally was like, okay, we'll go with Rhaenyra. The weakness thing is interesting because, Daemon does not strike me as the typical... Like, he is a psychopath, but he's not like so wildly off the spectrum.
As far as people in control at that time. Or that world, we should say.
Exactly. Like for instance, like his idea with the City Watch of Law and Order, it's too far, but even Viserys is like, some of this will be good. Like a little bit of Law and Order will be good, And then like when he talks to him on the Iron Throne, which by the way, the Iron Throne, as it turns out, is an incredibly unpractical seat because it just cuts you with swords every time you sit on it.
Yeah, it's ugly too. It's an ugly throne room.
And like in an era where like, oh yeah, you get cut on your back, you might die from an infection. It's just kind of insane that they just keep putting their kings on this infection-ridden, sharp cutting chair.
They get a tetanus shot every year.
It's so ridiculous. But that scene at the end where he's sitting on the Iron Throne with the sword, and then Daemon walks up and basically says to him like, "You are weak."
Yeah.
And I thought it was a really interesting dynamic because I didn't look at it as Viserys is the good king and Daemon is the evil king option.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at it as like there's a spectrum, and the spectrum goes from weakness to strength.
This is Jason who says that Palpatine's not evil too. No, I'm just kidding. I'm giving you a hard time. I'm giving you a hard time. I see what you're saying. I'm just being a devil's advocate.
So that's a fair point.
No, I know what you're saying.
This is a fair point. This is a fair point.
And if a king has to be willing to make some terrible, terrible decisions,
exactly.
especially when it's either, hey, your people live or the other people live, right? So,
exactly.
I see what you're saying.
That's the funniest thing. That bothers me with leadership all the time. Like, I hate when people Monday morning quarterback leaders. And this is not a political take because it has to do with both sides of the spectrum. I've seen people do it with Biden and I've seen people do it with Trump. But like when you Monday morning quarterback leadership decisions,
yeah,
when when you have no idea what intel was presented, like these men,
There's so much we don't know
These men
about.
could be sitting in a room and it could be like, hey, this is the situation. You're effed both ways. Which way do you want to go?
Which way
and
do
the
you
guy
wanna get
might have
effed?
to be like, this way. And then like what'll happen is they'll be like, I can't believe you made this decision because all this bad stuff happened. And
Right.
like, he might know what, like, it just, there's an expression, heavy lays the head that wears the crown or whatever it is. And it's like, it's true. Like
Right.
the man who has to make the decisions has to live. It's not easy. Is
Yeah.
the point.
Right.
Yeah. So, anyway, there's a spectrum, and I viewed it more as like Damon is really far on the strong end of things to the point where he's too crazy on that front. But you're right. Like Viserys is weak.
I think he's too weak. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's kind of funny because my initial impression of him was he's weak, and then he made the choice to try and keep his son, to save his son, and he essentially had his wife murdered.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, that's a really tough decision. But then I was thinking, I'm like, she was probably going to die anyways.
Yeah. So
You know what I mean? So
that's-
it wasn't really a decision at that point. And
What-
it came off as he was making this terrible decision, but in their eyes, their doctors or whoever they were like, she's going to die anyways,
Yeah.
essentially. So it wasn't some crazy profound idea that he decided to try and save his kid.
he literally says like you can save the babe potentially and lose the wife. He's like, or you can leave it in the God's hands.
Right.
Which is like we'll see what happens. But I mean, medically speaking, like, so basically I would assume like the baby's turned in a direction where
The
it can't
baby's
come
turned
out.
incorrectly. But the thing is, yeah. So
And what happens
breaches-
if the baby stays in too long? Then what happens if it gets an infection?
Dude, a lot of things could happen. She could bleed out. Essentially, the baby can become strangled. Essentially, so there's like almost like a ticking time bomb that happens during pregnancy. At some point, they need to get the baby out, right? And yeah, I mean, it puts both mom and baby at significant risk,
Yeah.
especially back then.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
And another side tangent. That's what blows my mind about people jousting. I'm like, why are you guys riding at each
Full
other
speed.
just with essential
Spears.
spears? And then you're like, oh yeah, like you got that nick on your side. You come out unscathed, and then like 2 weeks later, you die of sepsis.
It's so ridiculous. I do want to get to the jousting.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
So here's my question. How do we feel
How does
about
this relate to Bane? No, I'm just kidding.
How does this relate to Darth Bane? Okay, so what do we think of Viserys' decision? Because there's two elements to it. His decision, which I think is defensible on a bunch of different levels.
Yeah, it's disgusting, but
Yeah, it's disgusting.
It's defensible back then.
And he comes off as weak when he goes like, wait, you can save my son? You know, like it comes
Right.
off as weak when he says that. But like the decision itself is defensible. The tough part of it is the not telling the wife what's happening.
Dude, I struggled.
Dude, that
That
was a
was
hard
terrible.
scene to watch.
Again, that's when Elaine and I were just like looking at each other like, oh my gosh, this is totally not getting me into the mood to sleep.
No, for sure. And
Later.
I get that, but I'm that specific. There's a difference between gratuitous sex and violence and then dramatization. So like the Game of Thrones people came out and were like, hey, we're not going to be as gratuitous with the sex and violence in this show as we were with the original, which I appreciate, and I think you will as well.
Yeah.
Although I thought the one scene where it was gratuitous was the jousting scene where suddenly they just showed like 4 bodies getting mutilated.
I know.
in rapid succession. But,
It was pretty intense. Yeah.
Yes, but other than that, like they did. There was the brothel scene, but it's not like they just had people walking around naked like they did in the original Game of Thrones, and
Dude, what are you talking about? There's the dozen people walking around naked.
only in the brothels.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
In Game of Thrones, in the original Game of Thrones, it's like Daenerys is just walking around naked for like the entire
I
first
see.
season. Like,
I
it's,
see.
yeah, it's like and even when she's not naked, like you can see through everything. Like, it's just like it's clearly intentional. Like,
I see. Okay.
but anyway, my point is like that specific situation of the birth
Mm-hmm.
is a real thing that has probably happened thousands and thousands of times
Yeah.
over the
Throughout
years.
history.
And at some point in history, they found a way where they could save both.
Mm-hmm.
Sometime in the last 100 years, I would imagine, maybe even earlier than that. But the point is like that was a dramatization, as difficult as it is to watch.
Yeah.
It almost like puts you in of what that situation would have been like.
It-
if
yeah,
you were
it does.
there. Can you imagine?
Oh, you
Like, what if that was Elena? Like, can you imagine?
having to make that choice? No,
Dude.
that's exactly what I was doing. That's exactly what I was imagining. Like, how could you be in that situation? It'd be so hard.
Dude.
So hard. And and I guess that is, a huge compliment to the show is they do puts you. It feels like you're there.
Yeah. Oh,
Right.
The acting and production in the show is incredible.
Yeah, it feels like you're there, and then it feels like you put yourself in those people's shoes. Like, oh my gosh, like what would I do in this situation? Like there was probably maybe half a dozen times where I was thinking, okay, like, well, what if I was king? Like, would I have my daughter take the throne, or would I have my what was it, brother take the throne? Right.
And by the way, I would absolutely, if my daughter was like Rhaenyra and was like headstrong and
Right.
and ambitious, like I absolutely would make her.
oh, for
the
sure,
queen.
it's a clear
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah, absolutely. But just the other example like that I'd give is, did you ever watch 13 Reasons Why?
I did actually. Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember at the end of season 1 when she kills herself?
Actually, I watched most of it.
Okay, good thing you missed the end. So very similar scene. There's the daughter kills herself in a bathtub with razor blades cutting her wrists, and then the mom walks in and finds her, and it was like one of the top 3 or 4 most traumatizing like movie television scenes I've ever seen. Like it messed me up for a few hours. And like
At least 5 minutes. It
yeah,
was
at
just
least 5
terrible.
minutes. I was just
part in my life.
After that, then I started reading Darth Bane again.
Yeah. And I juiced up.
I read the part where he kills the father and son for fun, and then
And then
but like that scene, that's a great example of what I'm talking about. Like I think the people who produced that scene understood that what they were doing was capturing a moment that has happened hundreds of millions of times throughout human history. Sure. A loved one committing suicide and people finding the body. Like it's just like it's horrific. You know what I mean? And it is. But yeah, so we're in defense of Viserys. But should he have told her?
Oh, geez, dude, these are tough questions. This comment is going to be on the internet for forever.
I don't know. I don't think you're
with that. I know with that decision, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Oh yeah, that
would create an extreme panic.
Yeah. What if she panics and said no, and then they both die?
Yeah.
So
it's kind of funny in hunting. Not that I'm a big hunter, but it greatly interests me. And where I grew up, a lot of people hunted, and especially in bow hunting too. Bow hunting is so difficult to get a good shot. You have to get extremely close to the deer. Bow hunters are amazing. Like Cameron Hanes is an amazing athlete. Cameron Hanes is
he's the one that does the trick shots with the bow?
He's probably just the most famous hunter in the world when it comes to bow hunting.
Gotcha.
He was even sponsored by like Under Armour. He's on the Joe Rogan podcast. Like he's ringside at UFC events. Like and he's a hardworking dude who he essentially dedicates his life to training. So then he feels like he's optimal enough and ready to try and take a deer's life. Like he has an utmost respect for like deer and elk.
And taking life, yeah.
Yeah. So shoot, what was my point? Shoot, I forgot.
The decision for Viserys? It was about whether or not you tell the mom.
Right. So after he gets a shot on like an elk or a deer, a lot of hunters should, and they do, they allow the deer or the elk to just kind of bed down somewhere and bleed out peacefully.
Yeah. And
they think it's far less traumatic on the animal than just running up to it and like stabbing it in the throat, right?
Yeah.
So the unknowing, I think, is probably less traumatic for her.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I don't, again, you put it, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
That's like, a disgusting decision.
It's what happened in the show is beyond traumatizing.
Right.
But if you tell her, she also freaks out and it's beyond traumatizing.
Right.
Because now she knows she's going to die.
And then from a medical standpoint, it creates a lot of other complications too. Like, could you imagine trying to perform a C-section on someone who's squirming and thrashing about? Like, that'd be incredibly dangerous, right? That'd be incredibly dangerous. C-sections are already traumatic enough. Like, I've seen C-sections live before, and they're insane. Like, they're absolutely insane. Straight out of Game of Thrones.
Dude, yeah. Well, they straight up cut into the belly, right? Yeah,
yes. It's insane. It's wild. So yeah, you cannot have someone thrashing about during that.
Oh, no. Dude. Okay, so I have one, because we've been going for quite a while. We don't have to get into the weeds, because we're going to have so much time to talk about more of these concepts in the coming weeks. But I have one thing that I wanted to talk about. Is there anything in your notes that you had in there that was interesting to you that we haven't gotten to yet?
No, dragon smell. That was it. I was like, man, they're really emphasizing the fact that dragons smell bad.
So, Targaryens are big on their visions.
Mm.
And there's a moment over the bathtub where Viserys is talking to his wife and says, quote unquote, like, I had a vision. I saw it was clearer than a dream.
Oh, right.
It was my son coming out with Aegon's crown, all this stuff. And he feels so passionately about it. And then at the end, he's talking to Rhaenyra in front of Balerion's skull.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically says, like, I believe he's talking about Aegon, but one of the Targaryen ancestors has a vision of a long winter.
Essentially,
that
the
will
plot
come
of Game
out
of Thrones.
the North. Yes.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And he talks about how it'll be incredibly important for whoever's leading Westeros to be able to quickly unite all
Everybody,
of the kingdoms
right.
to face the threat. And he talks about how it's a secret that needs to be passed along from generation to generation.
Right.
And clearly, and I'm really curious to see, because in Game of Thrones, there's a group called the Night's Watch, which serves the purpose of guarding the North, and they build that giant wall and all that stuff. I'm really curious to see what the timeline is there, if that's something that happens during this show, if that's something that happens sometime in the next couple hundred years.
Right.
But like the people from Winterfell, the Starks, they actually say winter is coming. Like it's a tradition. So clearly, at some point, it becomes public knowledge.
Yeah.
That the White Walkers are coming. But in general, like seeing that scene just reminded me of the whole White Walker storyline
And how cool it is.
And it's one of the biggest reasons why I want you to get into Game of Thrones eventually, because like it is, there's an ominous, there's an inevitability to it.
Right.
There's a, and that's the thing. Like it's like with Thanos in Marvel, he has this immense amount of power. He's got these Infinity Stones that expand his power, and he just seems unbeatable.
Yeah.
And like that's kind of the White Walkers kind of present that same type of ominous dread.
Right.
And like you could feel that dread in that scene when he's telling, like, you cannot forget this and you have to pass it along because this will happen. And I just thought that scene was super interesting.
I think it was interesting too. And I didn't know. So you know how at the end of Obi-Wan, where we see Qui-Gon, and we had predicted that we were going to see at least some Qui-Gon, but it was more of just kind of a cherry on top, like, hey, we kind of have to have the scene because of the prequels and the end scenes there. So here's Qui-Gon. They said it was going to happen, and here he is. So I wonder if that was just kind of a little gem, like, hey, this is how it relates to major plot of Game of Thrones, or if it's going to be a huge plot development. We'll see. Dude, I was just thinking about this too. If you could learn like all the intricacies of Game of Thrones and memorize it, that would be the ultimate bedtime story.
Dude, oh yeah.
Wouldn't that be incredible? So because it's such a huge plot, and there's so many like different pieces of it that you could tell like a bedtime story to like a kid and make it, PG, and that could last for like months. And that would be so cool for like a kid to experience that. I'm
blanking out the movie where the dad's reading this, or the grandpa, uncle, somebody's reading the story to the kid in bed, and it's the princess. Is it The Princess Bride?
I'm not sure.
Gosh, you don't remember this one with the giant and oh man, Luke.
I can't remember. I know,
dude.
I have lived under a rock for the last.
This is an old movie.
So I'm sorry.
You should. Okay, well, we'll have to. I'll have to send it to you, and we'll have to work it out later. Anyway, I did think. I think you're right. I think it'll probably end up just being an homage paid to the original show. But it is. I did think that part was cool, and I'm curious to see if they do expand on that, because the Night's Watch is literally like a group of people that guard against this, and so it's conflicting for it to be like a secret that's passed along from the. But it also, you could tell, like, that's. I did think it was cool where it was like he basically framed it as like, no, this is what the Targaryens do. Like, we have visions and we see things,
right? But
that was where he got his confidence from the vision of his son.
With his vision, though, do you think that he was just blatantly incorrect, or do you think that he might have interpreted it incorrectly, and that's going to be like his grandson or something like that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So
because what if a different version of his vision comes true in the future?
right. So or it's just an obvious sign of someone who's completely wishful thinking and would do anything to try and have a son, including kill his wife.
Yeah, exactly. Just confirmation bias, like
Confirmation bias.
I want this to happen, so when I have a cloudy dream, I'm going to suddenly decide
Right.
it's a vision, like that.
Which
kind
stuff
of
like
idea.
that freaks me out because people
Dude.
actually live their lives to stuff like that. It's just mind-boggling to me.
Okay. The Cole guy, he's not a noble, but he kicks the shit out of everybody in the jousting contest. So
Yeah.
I wonder if he's going to be kind of like a Jon Snow type of character. The only other one I had in there, she's going to claw the crap out of
I know.
The only other one I had on there was little Easter egg for you. So do you remember the big castle in the opening scene where the old king is sitting on the throne and they have the council where they're determining whether or not
It's all broken down and
Yes.
destroyed. Uh-huh.
so that
was
castle
really neat.
that castle is called Harrenhal. It is not the same castle that they're in through most of the show. Harrenhal was the largest and most powerful or strong, strongest defenses, whatever you want to call it. It was the biggest and most powerful castle in all of Westeros. And when Aegon the Conqueror was conquering Westeros, he took Balerion and just destroyed that castle.
Jeez.
Just destroyed it, and that's why it looks all
It was
destroyed.
messed up.
So I was thinking, like, what a power move. What a power move for the old king to basically be like, all the lords of Westeros don't come to King's Landing, come to Harrenhal so you can look at what we do if you screw with us.
Wow. Yeah, that's actually a huge power move.
And then like we're gonna pick the new heir, and then obviously all the lords of Westeros probably swore fealty to that heir, just like they did to Rhaenyra at
Right.
the end. But I thought that was a really cool scene because it's just like an example of like the Targaryens like flexing their muscle on people and letting them all know.
It was a good move, as they should, right?
Yeah.
What was cool too is they put a lot of effort into the production of the show. So like in that, I always look at the background scenes, and what was really cool and very Star Wars-esque is there's a lot of movement in the backgrounds. Like, so these huge scenes with, dozens and dozens of people that are all busy doing their own things. And that was really cool to see. And then also they had like scaffolding in that scene too.
Yeah.
Then they're like rebuilding it. So I thought that was neat too.
Yeah.
Because they completely did not have to have that, right? It would have been very easy for them just to have, an open cathedral type setting and just packed people in there, but they're so detailed.
That's what I mean by the attention to the depth of the plot. That's
Yeah.
what I think you will grow to appreciate so much about.
Yeah,
that
that's
show.
why I just want you to tell me about it and not watch it. I'm just kidding. I'll watch it.
All right, end of episode of 1 of Game of Thrones. We will at least briefly touch on it each week, and I'll just split them up for YouTube and stuff like that.